Welcome to the Six Hats podcast, where I, Dr. Shami, a lifestyle and nutritional medicine family doctor, will talk about how women strive to find balance each day by juggling their six roles, being a woman, mother, daughter, partner, business owner, and professional. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Six Hats podcast. And today we're speaking with Carla Veith-Carter, a nutritional consultant, passionate keto coach, and public speaker. Now, I met Carla at Tracy McBeat's event, Lived Experience Conference in Melbourne a couple of months ago. And what I was really taken by Carla's talk about her chronic medical condition and how she used diet to help manage her symptoms. So I'm really excited to have Carla share her story. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing, Carla. So I'd love for you to actually share the journey with fibromyalgia, because I have to say many practitioners do not fully understand it. And in the current medical model, when I reflect back, it's not designed for chronic health conditions, because in 10 minutes, what can you really talk about and what kind of solutions can you come up with? It needs that longer consult. It needs a journey with the practitioner and the patient and that deeper understanding.
Totally agree.
I'd love for you to start.
Okay, well, I think the good place to start is probably my diagnosis, because this goes back to what you're saying about the need for more in-depth consultations. So I got referred to a neurologist, and the first time I went, literally as I was walking out the door, he said, "I could diagnose you with fibromyalgia, but what would be the point?" And I'd never heard of fibromyalgia. So I'm walking out the door thinking, oh my goodness, what has he just said? What does this mean? And so obviously he didn't give me any tips or anything. So nothing changed. And so the GP sent me back to the same guy again. And then this time he did give me a diagnosis, because what else was he going to do, really? He didn't have any actual useful information, but he could tell me what it was, which in itself is useful, because then you can do your own research and you can find out, and speak to other people who've had the same experiences, etc. So I did say to him, what can I do? I was quite excited. I thought, okay, I've got a label for this. Now, what can I do about it? And he said, oh, well, not much really. Some people say exercise helps, and there might be a medication that could help a bit. And I said, well, I'm not a massive fan of medication if it's not going to be really useful. I mean, if it's going to revolutionize my life, then absolutely. But if it's, if you're not kind of telling me it's going to be that great. And he said, oh, no, I won't really do that much. There's not really much point. So I kind of left thinking that I didn't have a lot more information than when I first went, other than a name of what fibromyalgia was. Yeah. What I discovered is that, and he didn't tell me this, but it's basically an overactive nervous system, things that would happen to me that other people wouldn't feel pain, I would feel excruciating pain. And there's other symptoms more along the lines of, with sleep and anxiety and other things as well. But pain is, I guess, the sort of the universal one. And for me, at the beginning, before I had all the strategies in place that I do now, and like you said, keto is my kind of central piece of my puzzle, as I like to think of it. And then I've got lots of other little pieces all around the edge, and they all are required to sort of hold me together, so to speak. But before I had all of that, my life was really precarious. Like, I had 2 young children, and my oldest has got severe autism. So his behavior is always erratic, potentially dangerous. You've always got to be very much on alert and being able to, stop him from doing something at a moment's notice. So for me to be in a situation where at any moment my whole back could seize up and I wouldn't be able to move was really, really scary, because if that happens and I'm alone with the kids and Orlando grabs a knife or, whatever it is, like, I couldn't do anything about it. So it was quite scary. And so I think from a day-to-day point of view, like what you were asking me earlier about that day-to-day thing, there's a lot of fear, a lot of pain. I was just in constant pain, which varied in amount. And I was always just thinking, when is my whole back going to seize up? When am I going to be literally incapacitated? And I just would get affected by things a lot more than other people, like I'd just get a common cold, for example, but it would take me months to recover. I would just have so much lethargy afterwards. I could hardly get off the couch. And I'd keep going back to the doctor and say, what's wrong with me? All I had was a cold. I haven't got those symptoms anymore. And eventually they'd say, oh, well, it might be post-viral lethargy. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what can I do about that? Oh, nothing really. Just wait. Like there was just a lot of lack of understanding, really. And I felt like I was just kind of on my own, to be honest, and just constantly worried about what movements I was going to be able to do. Will I be able to lift the hairdryer today? Because if I put that up behind my head, that's the sort of movement that might just make my whole back go, or like even just getting up and down off the toilet. Like I was started to think like I needed to have old people rails around the house, like it was just very debilitating. But because it's invisible, it's also very hard to explain to other people. And so I really didn't talk about it a lot, but it did really limit my life, and it made me have very low energy. And my husband would say, oh, let's go for a walk around the block. And I would just think, you may as well have asked me to climb Mount Everest. Like it was just the energy. My legs would feel like lead, like so heavy, like just to walk was just really, really hard. So it just, affected my sleep and my mood and also like everything, like just like I said, just debilitating. And so I'm so grateful that I've found everything that I've found now and that I feel like a new person.
I love the word you use, invisible. It's so true because you may present okay at the doctor
Yeah.
and you're smiling, you're happy, and it's so hard for the practitioner to really understand the level of pain you're in because you're
Yeah.
still functioning, but it's a struggle to function. And I often have patients who say, I present well, but I am suffering. And it's
Yeah.
really important to understand that. And I think just psychology of human nature, we need to see something broken almost to believe it. It has to be visible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I was in a wheelchair, nobody would question it. But because I can walk, and it depends as well it always seems to be that, you go to the doctor and you're having a good day, so they don't actually see the worst of it, but it really does depend the moment that they see you. Like if somebody saw me the time that, like I was in a yoga class, and on my way down from standing to the mat, my whole body spasmed. And I had to lie there for an hour and a half, literally unable to move. Like I could not move a muscle. And I was in agony, and I just had to lie there for the whole time until the end of the class, until I could get people to help me and get all sorts of anti-inflammatories and heat packs and everything just to be able to make me move. If someone sees me like that, they're like, oh, okay, I can see that. But someone sees me on another day where, yes, I'm in pain, but I'm functioning, I'm pushing through that pain, and they don't see it. So it's very individual. It's very up and down. You have flares, you have good days and bad days, you have good weeks and bad weeks. So it's very variable. You can't just rely on one snapshot of a 10-minute appointment, or even friends or family seeing you at one point. Or, you might see someone and you might be fine, but then that exhausts you so much, it takes you a week to recover from one social outing or whatever it is, like it can be very invisible and very hard to see behind the immediate front. And you have kids, you don't have a choice. You can't say, I'm going to bed, I'm relaxing, I'm not going to do all the things I have to do. You just have to push through it. So you then appear like you're functioning, even though you don't feel like you are.
Yeah. This is a brilliant segue to the strategies that you decided to take on. And it's almost a journey that you were on. Like no one really advised you. It's almost like you've stumbled upon the diets, you found the strategies. It was your hard work, to be honest, Carla.
Yeah, I really realized that no one else was going to help me. And so I just bit by bit over time, and it certainly wasn't overnight. It was very gradual. I just sort of picked up different things that I realized helped me. So like I did Pilates, for example, which helps with your core muscles and just keeps you a bit more flexible. And I would have to learn to limit myself in terms of how much I could do. I had to learn to listen to my body so that if I was feeling that I was having a bad day, that I wouldn't push myself, which is really, really hard because you get to the point where you're having a bit of a better day and you want to do everything that you haven't been able to do before. But you have to go slow. And so you kind of have to learn these strategies. And I discovered different supplements, anti-inflammatory supplements and so on. I discovered CBD oil, which was an amazing revelation. First time I had CBD oil was the first night that I'd slept through for a very long time. Helps with my pain and my sleep, and I still take it. I did eventually go on a medication, NDEP, which I take half the lowest dose. So I kind of don't feel, even though medication's never my number one choice, it does make enough of a difference that I do take it. But like I said before, diet is that crucial piece in the middle. And, I can do as much exercise and supplements and medication and other things, as I like. But if I don't eat right, that is just the number one thing. So I started off doing low carb. And low carb was good, but keto was amazing. So for me, and not everybody has to do keto. Like, I'm not one of these people that says, because I do keto, that means that keto is right for everybody. For many people, low carb is sufficient. But the difference for me and why I think ketones are so important, not only am I not eating the inflammatory foods like sugar and refined carbohydrates, but my body is producing the ketones, which in and of themselves, I see as therapeutic. So ketones are a form of energy, but they are also anti-inflammatory, and they dampen an overactive nervous system, which is exactly what at the core of fibromyalgia. And they also help to increase calming neurotransmitters like GABA, which helps everything. If your body is calm, then that's going to help sleep and pain and everything. So I feel like there's so much more research that needs to be done in this area, but there is research to show that low carb does help with quality of life for people with fibromyalgia. But I'm not sure whether I haven't seen any actual research on keto per se, but for me, the difference is like low carb is like a little fire and keto is like a bonfire, like in terms of the difference of benefit. And a few years ago, I had a night away with my husband for our anniversary, and we went to a really nice restaurant and they had this, millions of courses. And I just said, well, you know what? It's our anniversary. I'm just going to eat whatever I want because it's a one-off and I'll be fine. And so, of course, there were lots of carbs and I had dessert, which I never normally did. And the next day, oh my goodness, my husband was like, what is wrong with you? Like, I was crabby, I was tired, I was in pain, my legs felt like lead. The day before, we'd been, on long walks and everything. And then the next day, my husband's like, oh, let's go for another walk. And I'm like, oh, really? Do we have to? Like, it was just pork and cheese from one day. And so I just thought, it's not worth it. Like, people that say your diet's so extreme, you're missing out, la, la, la. It's like, well, I understand why people see it like that when they're not used to eating that way. But if you have a chronic condition and you eat that way and your whole life is revolutionized and you have more energy and you have less pain and you just more able to cope with life and do things and enjoy life and focus on your career and do all the things that you want to do, like, it's worth it, and also as you go through, you really don't feel like you're missing out because your taste buds change, your, metabolic health changes. You get to the point where you're actually craving different things, like if I have a curry now, like the thought of having rice with it, I think, why would I want to water down the flavors of the delicious curry with boring old rice? Like
it starts to shift.
What was that?
Starts to shift. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It does start to shift.
Exactly. So people who think, a lot of people, I think they're like, oh, I'm going to do low carb or keto as a sort of a band-aid or like to sort of fix a problem and then just go back to how I was. Like, I mean, first of all, if you revert to how you were, then your condition, whatever it is, will revert to how it was. And second of all, it really needs to become a lifestyle. You need to have a big enough why. And sometimes it takes people to get to a point in their life where they're really struggling before that reason is big enough to overcome their desire to eat the way that they currently do. And sometimes there's addiction involved in that as well. I certainly felt like I was going through withdrawal when I went low carb. And I'm not saying it's easy because it really isn't easy. And I think as well, because my adrenals were so shot and I was so in such a bad place, that for me, that transition was really, really difficult because my body didn't have any reserves to sort of work with. And so that change from using carbohydrates for energy to using fat for energy and then ketones, that was really hard for my body. And I think if I could go back in time, I would definitely give myself some different advice. I'd certainly do it a bit more gradually. And I think that, yeah, you just need to be very careful when you have fibromyalgia that you're not doing anything too much to sort of shock your system, and just overnight, people that just like overnight say, I want to go low carb or I want to go keto, like I do not recommend that for fibromyalgia people. I just think you really need to go slow, cut out sugar, stick to whole foods, but cut out the refined carbs and then very gradually reduce those carbs, because otherwise it's such a shock for your body. And, supporting yourself with supplements and things like sugar-free electrolytes and things like that is really, really helpful to help with that transition and to get some advice as well. I think that there's a lot of people out there that want to make changes, but they don't really know how. And so it's so important to, before you start, to get enough information, to go online, do some research, maybe get a functional doctor or a nutritionist or a health coach or somebody who specializes in this area to give you that helping hand and to let you know you're going in the right direction and work with you when you have hiccups along the way, because it's never a straight line. You never just say one day, oh, well, like someone listening to this podcast, oh, great. Okay, Carla feels fabulous doing keto and she's got fibro and so do I. So I'm just going to overnight do keto. Like, it just doesn't work like that. It can be tricky. There's a lot to navigate. There's a lot of even like labels, reading the different labels and working out whether to believe what's on the front and how to read what's on the back and what to look for. And something might say sugar-free, but if it's full of maltodextrin and maltitol and, all these things that are going to spike your blood sugar anyway, like, it's just advertising. You need to know all the tricks and what to look for, and ideally sticking to real whole foods. But then initially it can help to have those substitutes and the things that you are used to having, and to find recipes or to buy things that you're used to, because it is a really big shift. And to just say to someone overnight who's used to eating regular standard Australian diet, to go from that to just eating whole foods keto, I mean, that's a big ask, and psychologically that's really difficult, because you might want to do it in theory, but if in practice your brain is rebelling against you and you're not able to do it and you just say, well, stuff it, it's too hard, I'm just going to go back to how I was, you'd be better off doing it gradually and not having that sort of mindset of like, this is too hard, I can't do it, because you do it step by step. So yeah, that's why I think it's really important to get information, to talk to other people who've been through it and get some advice, and maybe with, a doctor or a health coach, nutritionist, dietitian, whatever, but somebody who specializes in this area. Because if you just ask a regular doctor or a regular dietitian, they're going to give you advice that perhaps might not be helpful.
I agree. I loved what you said, Carla. Definitely you need that advice and support. But for our audience, I'd love for you to define low carb versus keto. How low was the carb intake that you had to go down?
Good question. So when I first started low carb, basically what I did was just cut out the main carbohydrates. So I no longer ate rice and pasta and bread and potatoes. That were kind of the things that I said, right, well, they're the obvious starchy, and sugar, obviously. And when I say sugar, I mean sugar comes in all forms. I'm talking everything from honey to maple syrup to coconut sugar to all the things that people consider to be natural and healthy. It's still sugar. The body still sees it as sugar. So you've got to learn also all the different words for sugar as well. So so at first I cut out sugar and all the obvious refined carbohydrates. But because I was low carb and not keto, I think it was very easy for me to be fooled into just exactly how much carbohydrate there is in things that you wouldn't necessarily think. So the things that would be keeping me out of ketosis, and I'm not saying that these foods are bad foods, I'm just saying that they have carbohydrates in them, is things like, for example, you might have a few too many nuts, which have got carbohydrates in them, or you might have, I used to love low carb pasta, like edamame pasta, but then I'd have like a tomato-based pasta sauce, which you think, well, that's just tomatoes. Sure it is, but those tomatoes, when you have enough of them, especially when they're made into a puree like that, the carbs add up. And vegetables, like, I'm not saying don't eat vegetables, but you just have to be careful as where that line is of the lower carb versus the higher carb, or fruit, for example, So there are lots of things that I think at the time I was just so busy getting rid of those main carbs that I wasn't as aware of all the little bits adding up. So when I decided that I really wanted to do keto, I weighed and measured everything for a couple of weeks. And even though I've studied nutrition, and even though I should, in theory, know what's in things, it was still shocking to me how quickly things added up. And especially too, if you're making low carb versions of things, and often almond meal is at the base of those if you're making biscuits or cakes or things like that. And at the beginning, I really wanted those substitutes. I wanted to feel like I was still able to eat the things I was missing, breads and cakes and all that sort of stuff. And so I would use a lot of almond meal and nuts and seeds and things like that in those products. And so that was all adding up as well. So I think as well, when I went keto, I also perhaps ate a lot more just pure whole foods, like just meat and veg, for example. And I think a lot of those those substitute type things are the things that you have little bits of carbs that do add up. And also you have to think about, especially if you're buying them off the shelf and not making them yourself, there's all sorts of rubbish that they put in. And if you're just looking at the outside and it just says low carb and you think, okay, well, it's low carb, I can have it. But you're not looking at the fact that it's got all these different sweeteners and flavors and colors and whatever. Like, I think all of that has an effect as well. I feel like
Huge. Yeah.
the person with fibromyalgia has a very sensitive body. And I feel like the cleaner you can eat, the more that you can just make things from scratch, the better it is. And so I feel like with keto, I lowered my carbs, but I also ate cleaner, I think, as well. But in terms of actual grams of carbs, most people to be in ketosis can have about 20 to 30 grams of carbs, but it is variable because it depends on your activity level and your age and how much muscle you have and all that sort of stuff. So it is variable. And I highly recommend, if you want to be in ketosis, measuring your ketones, because that is the only way that you can know for sure whether or not you're in ketosis. And I was really surprised, given that I'd been low carb for years at this point, that it actually took me a couple of weeks to get into ketosis, even though I was eating really low carb. So I wonder as well if that is just, my body with fibro just taking its time to learn how to produce those ketones. But yeah, it's very variable, and that's why it's really good to measure, because if you measure, then you can work out where your limits are and what you can eat. And then once you've done that, you don't have to weigh and measure forever, because that just would drive you bonkers. You do it to a point where you just get an idea of what's in things, and you just know after a while what you can sort of get away with, in inverted commas. So that's what I did. I was really, really strict and weighed and measured everything, and just really learnt exactly what was in all the things and what my body could tolerate. Yeah. And when I got into ketosis, I really just wanted to stay there. And I know some people like to go in and out, and some people argue it's not good to always be in ketosis. I think that's fine if that suits you. But for me, I just feel like ketones are sort of my medicine. So it just suits me to stay in ketosis. And so I don't really need to measure anymore, because I just know that I am. But I do, maybe every now and again, I'll just test just to kind of see. I tend to use the breath monitor.
Oh, okay.
But I know, you can use blood or urine. For me, I feel like that's all a bit icky. And I just, the breath monitor is so convenient, so easy. You can just, it takes 20 seconds. You can do it anytime. It's pretty accurate. And the urine as well, like, after a time, it's not actually that accurate because your body starts using the ketones more rather than
Right.
weaning them out. And so a lot of people are like, oh, I was in ketosis and now I'm not, and I haven't changed anything. And it's like, no, it's not you, it's the thing that you're using to measure. So if you want to measure, there are those different options. But yeah, as I say, I like the breath meter, and it means you can test things as well. So let's say you've been in ketosis for a while and you're like, I really would love to be able to include X, Y, and Z in my diet. Well, you can try it and then test and then see what happens. And you might find that you can have more carbs than you thought you could. So yeah, it's a really handy tool early on anyway. Yeah.
Really amazing advice, Carla. And there's a couple of things I really want to emphasize. I loved how you said so-called healthy sugars. And I always say to patients, the body sees sugar as sugar. There's no such thing as a healthy sugar. Coconut sugar versus monk fruit, the body sees it as sugar and it will spike your glucose. And that's all the body cares about. Is it going to spike the glucose? And so it's really important to gain that awareness. And I love your journey because there is so much out there that we don't even realize is spiking our sugar. It's all hidden. And like what you said, maltodextrin, this is all hidden. And the more you look into packaging, the more you realize it is all adding up. And I loved also even nuts, especially cashews, peanuts.
Cashews are the highest, yeah.
Yeah, all of that spikes your sugar. So, and dried fruit, that's another thing I hear patients say, isn't dry food healthy? That's the worst you can do because it spikes the sugar the highest. And so even just stop snacking, eating those 3 meals, like what you said, whole foods, going back to basics is a great first step. So for those listeners who go, right, where do I even begin? I loved what you mentioned about eating whole food, but where can they begin? Like, what's the first step? Have you noticed, especially in your coaching?
Yeah, so it really does depend a lot on the individual because some people want to just rip the Band-Aid off and just go all out and say, right, overnight, I'm just going to do it. And other people are absolutely petrified of losing their favorite foods and they don't feel like they're going to be able to do it and they need to do it more gradually. So I guess you've got to know yourself and you've got to work out which one of those people you are. That's always one of the first things I ask people who work with me is, are you an all or nothing person? Like, right, I'm either doing it or I'm not, and I just want to do it completely. Or are you someone who needs to go more gradually? And that's a psychological thing, but also a physical thing. Because like I said, if you've got fibromyalgia, I would suggest you go more gradually. Even if you want to go gung-ho, it might not be the best idea from your body's point of view. So I guess the people that want to go, and just do it overnight, I would say just start weighing and measuring everything that you eat so that you get to learn what is in things, what the macronutrients are, how much fat and protein and carbs there are in everything. And initially, if you want to actually be in ketosis, aim for 20 to 30 grams or less of carbs a day. And then, ideally, if you can monitor that, get a breath meter or one of the other options so that you actually know. And just generally speaking, if you can, stick to real whole foods, like start with protein because the healthy fats usually will come with the protein. So don't fear fat unless, obviously there are fats that you want to avoid like trans fats and seed oils. But, if, for example, you're getting chicken thighs have got more fat than chicken breast. So it's fine to do that. And especially early on in the first little while of going keto, I think it's really important to have enough fat because your body is used to using carbohydrates for energy. And if you go from using carbohydrates to using fat and you're not providing your body with enough fat, then you've taken away both its sources of energy. So with time, your body will become fat adapted and learn how to use the fat on your body. But at the beginning, that's a hard ask, that the body hasn't had to do that before because we always give it enough carbs. In this world that we live in, we just always providing it with sufficient carbs. It doesn't have to use fat. So you've got to give it enough fat to make sure that you've got that energy so that you don't just completely feel like, terrible. And you might not feel so good initially because of that transition. They call it the keto flu. And some people, they might try it for a few days and say, well, I felt terrible. It didn't work for me. And it's like, no, that's normal. Electrolytes can help, but It is just a matter of, being kind to yourself and taking it easy and not pushing yourself, but just getting through that initial transition. So, yeah, so ideally focusing on whole foods, but I do think there is a place for those substitutes early on. I think if someone had said to me at the very beginning, not only have you got to go low carb, but you can't have any, pasta or rice or bread substitutes or sweet thing substitutes, I just would have thought that the whole world was collapsing around me. I just couldn't imagine, not having those things because I was emotionally attached to them, to be frank. And so I don't think that there's anything wrong in the early stages with using those things. So I used to use, for rice, I would use like a konjac rice, which is konjac's just a root. It's just fiber, basically. I would use the Slendia edamame pasta, which is very low carb. I used to love and still do, but don't eat it as much, the no-grainer bread, which is basically made with nuts and seeds. I've also got a few recipes of my own that I sometimes make bread. I'd always try and make, low carb biscuits or desserts or whatever. Or, we're so lucky in Australia. We've got so many things. You could just go to your regular supermarket and find low carb chocolate and bars and things. And, they might not all have perfect ingredients. But as I said, from a transition point of view, I don't think that's such a terrible thing. I think that it's about what works for each individual. And I know that there's a lot of polarization on that. And, there's a lot of people that are like, well, those artificial sweeteners are terrible and you should never tell anyone that they can have a Diet Coke. And it's like, okay, but if they're currently drinking real Coke and they want to transition to low carb and they feel that they need to have that as a stepping stone, then I'm fine with that. The ultimate goal, hopefully, is that they're going towards, a low carb kombucha or a sparkling water or, just plain water or herbal tea or something like that, But in the meantime, to get them through, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You need to work with the individual, and some people need to go slower than others. And in an ideal world, at the end of the day, you're aiming for whole foods, but you also have to be realistic and you have to take the person as they are in that moment and understand that not everybody is capable and that it's better to be low carb and have a few things in it that might not be ideal than for them to keep eating the way they were eating. So yeah, and I remember you actually asking me at Tracy's event about sweeteners and how they affected me. And I think that in the short term, having a sweetener as opposed to sugar doesn't affect me. Like if I had a lot of sugar in one go, all my fibromyalgia symptoms would flare. If I had some, monk fruit or stevia or allulose or something like that, then I don't think that's, ideal to be having huge amounts of that over time. But in that immediate instance, I'm not going to have a big fibro flare. I haven't had that big sugar spike. Yeah, there is a difference as well, probably. I mean, I certainly do avoid the, aspartame and all of the actual really fake sweeteners. And yeah, the ones that I think for most people don't spike their blood sugar that in the short term can be useful are things like allulose and stevia and monk fruit. But yeah, in an ideal world, you're eating whole foods and you're not eating those things. But, they have a place. And I think that it's useful to not make people feel guilty about using it as a crutch in the short term.
Totally agree with you, Carla, because food is actually really emotional. It's so psychological. We've created associations even from such a young age. When we think about that programming from such a young age of treat, it's a birthday party, it's a celebration. We've always linked it to sugar, and we've got to reprogram, we've got to rewire. And also when, we're in a diet so high in sugar, it affects mental health, can't actually think clearly, there's brain fog, there's fatigue. So you're actually working with a lot of obstacles initially, and that is okay. And that's why it's a journey, and it's not going to happen overnight. And also can be related to so many strong emotions that you may need to have psychological help as well to have a look at it. So it's really multifactorial. And I loved what you said, Carla. It's just being realistic, and it is a journey. It's a journey of creating new habits along the way.
And socially as well, I think it's really important to recognize that if you're having a birthday party and you want to have some cake sweetened with something that's a non-sugar sweetener that's going to align with your low carb or keto lifestyle as a one-off because you want to celebrate with cake on your birthday, well, that's not the end of the world. And I know that there are people out there that don't do that and that just say, oh, look, and it does depend on the person too. Some people that would set them back. Some people like just having cake of any description, even if it's low carb, would make them want more cake and it wouldn't be worth it. And in which case, then that's not a good idea for them. But for someone who's going to feel really deprived and is likely then to say, well, bugger it, I feel so annoyed that I didn't have a birthday cake that I'm going to go and raid the pantry and eat you have to balance and you have to be realistic. And you aim for whole foods only. Of course, that is the ultimate goal. But sometimes there are exceptions. And on my birthday, I'm going to eat cake. It's not going to have sugar in it. It's going to be low carb. But I'm still going to eat cake.
Exactly.
That's what I want to do. It's my birthday. Like it's once a year. Like I think that
Put it into perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Carla, as we wrap things up, I'd love to know, let our listeners know, where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram, keto_by_design. I've got a website, ketobydesign.com.au. You can email me, carla@ketobydesign.com.au. They're probably the best places, the places I hang out most. On Facebook, but I don't really interact as much. I'm more an Instagram person. So yeah, just send me a message and happy to help you and point you in the right direction. And yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Carla.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Remember that this is general advice only. Please see your healthcare professional for more information. So what's your take-home message today? Remember, it's all about progress and not perfection. And are you suffering from stress? Visit the Usawa Learning Hub on usawa.com.au for more resources on how to de-stress, re-energize, and reclaim your health. Enjoy the journey.